do not remember much about Russia anymore. I remember the way the streets were packed, the way the shops bustled, the way the trees swayed in the wind near our home. Apart from that, nearly everything has slipped away. The one most distinct memory I have from my early life in Russia is this. My father returned home from his work as a baker, ashen-faced and sweating, a tremor in his voice. I had never heard this before, as he told my mother, who worked tirelessly, that we must sell our home and leave immediately. So I asked my father, "Where are we to go, Papa?" He looked at me, smiled shakily, and pointed to a map on the wall of our kitchen. We did not come to America for riches or glory, like many people in the time of the Industrial Revolution. We came to be accepted. A boat ride that lasted several months took us to this new world, where we were all screened and quarantined in case of infection that could send us back to Russia without refund. Thankfully, we were all healthy enough to begin anew in this great city, New York. Within the first 6 months, however, the great city of New York stopped being so great. My father was working as a peddler, my mother was in some piecework factory, and I was bagging food at a grocery instead of attending school. Even with 3 working family members, we were still barely making enough to scrape by in our little one-room tenement. Once a week, on Shabbat, we would have fish or meat for supper. But apart from that, our food was bread and cheese, if we were lucky. There had to be a better way to live. Then, everything changed. My father came home one night after we had lived in New York for nearly a year, singing praises and bounding around in fits of joy. My mother asked him what was so incredible. He simply responded, "I have a job." Needless to say, my mother and I were quite confused, considering the fact that, of course, he had a job, making pennies, selling handkerchiefs and bottles, and whatnot. Father, however, would not elaborate. Less than a week later, he jumped for joy as the postman gave him a letter from some middle-of-nowhere American city called Milwaukee. The letter contained a check for $15 and a location at which my father was to board the train and move to his new job as a baker in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I was overjoyed upon hearing the news, but my father put his hands on my shoulders sadly and told me that I could not yet come, for he did not have the money to put my mother and I up, but he would get it soon. The next day, my father left, $15.43 and 3 sets of clothing, all he had to his name. He wrote frequently, and I wrote back, he happily elaborating on how his business was beginning to attract customers, and I responding how I looked forward to working with him there rather than the peddling route I had inherited after he left for Milwaukee. Finally, after the hardest 3 months of my life, spent even more impoverished than before, we received a letter from one Mr. Friend, who had a check enclosed for $25 signed by my father, which would pave the way for my mom and me to travel to Milwaukee. We packed everything and left that same day, catching the late train from New York Central Station. The train ride was uncomfortable, but not altogether unenjoyable. Several men in suits taught me to play cards to pass the time, and several other women gossiped away happily with my mother. After 6 days, we arrived here, in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, where my father waited with open arms. I was 10 years old. Thanks to my father, I passed through primary school, high school, and even attended college back in New York, where I became a teacher of history. Now, I feel satisfied that after 10 years of sharing the world's history, I've had a chance to share my own.